Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teaching Writing in College. I am your host, Tom Skeen, and I'm having a slight technical difficulty here with the slide coming up. There it is. Okay, the driving question is, how can instructors in higher education leverage theory, science, pedagogy, and craft most effectively to help their learners with writing? And I have to apologize. I meant to post this episode a couple of weeks ago, and I lost it somewhere on my hard drive. I looked for it for a while and was unable to find it, and I have not had a chance to re-record this episode. So this is a re-recording after the Thanksgiving break. I meant to have it probably about a week before the Thanksgiving break, if I remember right. I remember doing it, I just don't remember where it went. But thank you for joining me today. And I wanted to follow up with a second episode on this theme. Writing is made of genres, and genres are made of ROCSS. And you might remember from episode 15, where I introduced the same motto. I guess you could call it a class motto. I like to use it in my classes, have my students repeat it with me, simply because it sort of helps them learn what one of the most important aspects of their knowledge is that they are gaining in a writing course. And writing is made of genres, and genres are made of ROCSS. The second part of that is simply what ROCSS means, which is recurring occasion, content, structure, and style. Now, as a quick review, it's something that a shorthand way that I came up with over time. I didn't just make it up one day. I had some other similar, at least one other similar acronym that I was using in my classes, and that one was a little more awkward, and so I eventually settled on ROCSS, and I'll go into that history a little bit too. I think it's kind of fun to look back on my own teaching and see how it has changed, and so we'll get to that too in episode 3 or 4 of this little series, and or part 3 or 4, I guess, in this little series, and I'll go through that, and also where I got it from. I think it'll be important to talk about where I got it from. I would say, kind of in my own scholarship on learning transfer through my reading, I was able to kind of find this and say, you know what, I really need to take this into the classroom. I keep talking to my students about genre, and I don't really give them a framework to think about it. And so eventually ROCSS made its way into my vocabulary, and I have used it ever since as a way to frame my classes. But recurring occasion, content, structure, and style. And so to get started then, I have here just a screenshot. Well, it's not a screenshot. It's a photograph of a children's dictionary that I found in my son's room. I think it got into our house via his grandmother. She found it. It had been discarded, and she thought, well, here's one place where we could use it. My kids are still on the young side, and my son is just the right age to have a dictionary like this. And my other kids, I think, would enjoy it too. I should get it out more. But it, I think, is a really good example of just to explain how ROCSS works. And this is kind of how I go through it with my students a little bit. So I just wanted to give an overview of ROCSS using this page from a children's dictionary as an example. And so just to start off, just the first part, recurring occasion, as we know, rhetoric, genre, they rely very much on recurrence. And so it's important to have that, I think, as part of the definition of a genre. And so recurring occasion, I just have some questions that I ask students. And what I'm kind of doing here is I'm going through what I like to call a ROCSS analysis, which I do in the classroom quite a bit. And I just walk them through. I might give them an example like this, usually a smaller genre, something that they don't need to spend a lot of time looking at, like a dictionary entry, or I have also a nutrition label toward the end of this presentation. I like to bring things like that in, just everyday genres that I like to use just to think about how genre works. And then sometimes I also like to mix in genres, just screenshots of partial screenshots or just parts of genres that they might see themselves encountering in the future. So I like to survey my students about what their majors are, what they feel like their anticipated careers are, and then I go and I try to do some research and find things that they may find themselves reading or writing when they get into their careers. One example that's just coming up to me now is I've got a lot of psychology majors, and I also have a self-help book about parenting. and written by two psychologists or psychiatrists. And so if I bring an example of that in, maybe just a page or an excerpt from a book, I could put that up here too and have students talk about it. But here I've got just a simple page from a children's dictionary. So questions I like to ask my students for the recurring occasion: what kind of writing is this and what is it used for? Because that really, I think, gets to the heart of the recurring occasion, what it's used for. If we think back to Carolyn Miller's genre as social action, which is one of the big influences for me here with ROCSS, that, really helps open up, I think, a discussion about how a particular kind of writing might work and how students might approach working with that writing or mimicking that kind of writing in the classroom. Who writes these? Who reads them? So who are the authors and audiences? That also kind of helps get to what it's used for. What central questions are in play as they are being written or used? Another one, I like to think of that as well. When you think about writers and authors, usually there is some kind of question or some kind of need, some kind of exigence that is happening, and it can often be articulated in a question. And so in this case, a question like, what does this word mean, would prompt somebody to actually use the dictionary. And so it helps us get back up to the idea of use. And so if somebody is playing Scrabble, or if they're doing some homework, in the case of a child with this dictionary, then one of the central questions is, what is this word used for? Or what is this word? What does it mean? How is it spelled? How is it pronounced? And things of that nature are part of the recurring occasion here. Who writes dictionary entries? My understanding is it's a panel of linguists and other scholars who kind of keep track of our language and help determine over time what words belong in the language, which ones are getting outdated, which they might still keep, and then, mark as outdated. What the words mean, they would articulate that. What part of speech are they? So we've got people keeping track of this for us at places like, Merriam-Webster.com nowadays. And so they're the ones who write them, and then we use them. We might use them in schools. Nowadays, we could have a discussion about this too. Dictionaries often are found online, and you put something in Google, and it will give you a bunch of definitions, and I'm sure the same is true of ChatGPT nowadays. I have not tried that yet. I haven't asked it for a definition of a word. But these older ones like this, pages in a book, I remember these being in libraries, in the universities I've attended. In my high school, I remember a big dictionary being on a stand there in the library, and they can be found there too. But anyway, the recurring occasion, what kind of writing is this and what is it used for? And it's something that just keeps happening over and over again. We keep having questions about the language. The language keeps developing, and so we keep keeping track of it through dictionaries. And we keep having questions. People keep playing Scrabble, or they keep finding a need in school to use a dictionary like this. And so my son, I remember with his homework, there have been some times in the 4th grade last year, he had some assignments, I think maybe once a week even, where he really had to kind of dissect some of the vocabulary and some of the spelling words that he was learning. And we could have done it through this because we had it on the shelf. I didn't think about it at the time, and so I got one of the dictionary apps on my phone, and he used that. But recurring occasion. Content. What content is typical in a dictionary entry? Pretty straightforward. It's got the word, of course, and the pronunciation, the part of speech. Like if we look at the word honest here, we've got the word, then the pronunciation honest, then it's an adjective that is indicated. Then it's got the 3 definitions and in those definitions it also has some examples of usage. That's all pretty typical of dictionary entries. So first definition, free from fraud or trickery, straightforward. So it's also got a synonym in there, it looks like. And then a brief example of usage, an honest answer. So it's being used as an adjective there. 2, not given to cheating, stealing, or lying, upright, trustworthy. So some more synonyms there. And down at the bottom, it actually has a space with synonyms, and it says synonyms. See upright for those of you who can't if you're listening on Apple or Google. But so that's pretty typical for the content of it. And most dictionaries will just kind of walk someone through those basic items. And then, of course, there will be some variations. So when I think of other dictionaries, an example I bring into my classes a lot, it comes from a dictionary online, which is not a children's dictionary. And then it would give, nearly complete sentences in some cases. So they'll do things a little bit differently sometimes. There will be some variation in the way that they approach content because genres also vary. We can't forget that. And maybe we can talk about that sometime too. And another thing as I'm thinking about this, just with the content or the recurring occasion, it's important to have students see lots of examples within the same genre. So sometimes, if I were using this in class, I could bring in examples from a few other dictionaries and ask them, well, why are there these variations? Or if I'm asking them to do a particular type of writing, like a review or something like that, something my students just finished, then it helps to have several examples that they can look at because just one example would never be representative of a genre, and some genres can vary more than others. But I think, once again, one thing that kind of unifies them is the occasion, the recurring occasion, what it is they are used for that helps define them. So we can't lose sight of that. So it's important to note that and then also think about some of the different examples that we can find of the same genre to show the variation. So typical content there. Structure. How is this type of communication structured? Visually and textually, I like to think of both of those when I talk about structure with students. And so if we go back to this example of the word honest again in my children's dictionary here, it starts with the main thing that somebody would use to look it up, of course, to make it easy. So the actual word honest is there. It's all in alphabetical order. That's part of the structure. And then it just kind of walks through some of the typical things that help somebody become familiar with the word, such as the pronunciation and the part of speech, and then the definitions themselves, and so on. So that's the basic sort of textual structure. And it also, if you think about this in terms of familiar to unfamiliar, which I shared a few episodes ago, a strategy that I use for organizing or structuring writing with students, then it seems to follow that too. It's not going to start with something like being just what is indicated, that third definition there of the word honest. If the dictionary were to do that, nobody would ever be able to find the word honest. And so it's organized alphabetically. It's organized beginning with something that people would be familiar with when they are looking for the word, which is honest. The spelling, it starts with H, so they're going to go look for the H's. That's what they're going to find first. And then pretty typical, I think, close question is, how do you pronounce this? I think that happens quite a bit as well. Early on as they're getting familiar with the word, and then it can go into the content after that. Visually, also, there's some variation that helps a reader understand what they're looking at. There's the definition, there's honest, there's the entry, but then within that entry there is some visual differentiation. So the word honest itself is in bold, so it stands out a little bit better. It also has a hanging indent. There's the word honest, and then everything underneath that is indented slightly so that it's easier to find the words themselves. The different definitions are labeled 1, 2, 3. The part of speech adjective is in italics. The pronunciation, the linguistic pronunciation, is in brackets, and then it's got a linguistic transcription there instead of just, the word again. And the synonyms are in sort of a capital letter font instead of a more traditional font, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of visual structure here as well. The page itself is in columns, so we've got the 3 columns there. All of those things help the reader find what they need to find visually. And that could also be used as, maybe in some genres more than others, visual representations might also be used to sort of influence the way that the reader perceives whatever they are looking at. And so that's an important part of visual structure as well. So there's structure. Style. How does the writing in this genre typically sound? And so I like to do it that way with students. I kind of define style that way because if you put different genres together and you read them, or if I were to read something like this blind to students where I didn't tell them what it was, but I read it to them, they'd probably guess that it's a dictionary entry or something along those lines, maybe an encyclopedia. But different kinds of writing can sound different, and this is a good example, I think. This dictionary entry is a good example of how that can happen. And if I've got a list here. I've got several things that I like to kind of bring into the classroom with students when we talk about style. Sociolinguistics and sociopragmatics. And I want to just give a shout out to Kristen DiGennaro. There's an encyclopedia that I'm co-editing, and she wrote an entry. She's at Pace University, and she wrote an entry on sociopragmatics. And sometimes I think style fits well with that. When I was reading her entry, I thought of this. And so I'm going to, take some of what she said into the classroom, as a way to help students. But she said sociolinguistics is about the social expectations of how language is used in a given context, and that fits right along with genre, to my mind, simply because different genres get used in different contexts. And then sociopragmatics is also about the structure of the text, and so some of the linguistic structure that helps the reader follow along. So that's just putting that within genre, I think, is a really great way to help students. Just give them some tools to kind of describe style and describe how the writing is working at the linguistic level. Diction also, I think, can be important. Different kinds of writing often could contain different kinds of diction because different kinds of writing are about different things. And so diction can be a sort of a clue as to why the writing exists and what it's being used for and who wrote it and so on. Another one I like to call tone, just the idea that, there could be different ways of sounding, different moods, things along those lines. And so I just use the word tone there for students. Sentence structure. This dictionary, I like to bring in dictionaries because they are a great example of this. It's not written in a complete sentence. My definition of honest here, it just says, it doesn't say honest means free from fraud or trickery. It just has free from fraud or trickery. And so it skips the subject in this case. And different kinds of writing sometimes will change the grammar. And then it helps change the way that they sound. Academic articles often might have or business especially, I think, might have kind of a straightforward sentence structure where there's not a lot of variation. But then when you look at things that are made more for popular consumption, for example, there could be a lot of sentence variation in there. So sentence structure and grammatical choices there. The last one, linguistic register and formality. That's another way, I think, to kind of get at what different genres might allow for different kinds of formality, or variations within genres depending on the situation, depending on the occasion, might allow for different kinds of formality. But different linguistic registers might be associated with different genres as well. And once again, I am kind of creating a broad brush here, but the idea is just to give students ways to describe the way the writing sounds so that when they are working with a particular genre on their own, I can encourage them to be dynamic and say, okay, well, let's look at the sentence structures that are happening in these movie reviews, which are not academic articles. And the writing is going to sound more casual. It's going to sound more colloquial. Let's see if you can practice that. And sometimes students will be uncomfortable and they will want to avoid sounding too informal. But the idea is to help them become dynamic as writers and to be flexible so that they can think about how they might shift to different genres. It can become a metacognitive exercise too. Sometimes after a discussion of style, I might ask them, well, how did you feel as you tried to be less formal? We're in an academic setting here, I know, but how did you feel when it came to being less formal in your writing. And so lots of great things could come out of style and the other ones as well. But just for an extra bit of contrast here, I also have one on my next slide. Another example of writing. This time it is a food label from a half gallon of milk. It looks like that I took a picture of once, and I've taken this into class before. And I've got style there on my screen, but you can talk about the entire thing: recurring occasion, content, structure, and style. And what I'll usually do, once students get familiar with that, sometimes at the beginning of class, I will just, or anywhere really during class, if I want to break up the lesson a bit or get some variation going, I will put something like this up on the screen and ask them to do a ROCSS analysis, and where they would describe the recurring occasion, what is it used for, who writes them, who reads them, the content, the structure, and the style. Just to get them used to describing genres and to get used to looking at writing in terms of genre, so that they also can be comfortable switching genres, because the last thing they're going to do when they leave college is write college essays. They're going to be writing other kinds of things, and I think just a really solid foundation, kind of a working practical foundation in genre, can be really helpful, so they can sort of decode writing in terms of genre and then ask themselves, how can I adapt? I've got this occasion here. Here's this thing that keeps happening, and I'm seeing this kind of writing in this new context. It's being used for something here, so how can I write something similar so that it can be used for the thing that I'm seeing writing being used for? And so that's the idea. It's kind of a good vehicle to help them carry their knowledge of writing outside of the classroom. And also, the next thing that can happen after ROCSS is they can also have a lot of strategies. I like to spend a lot of time with a lot of other strategies that help support recurring occasion, content, structure, and style. And so, for example, strategies related to invention can be really helpful for content. And so that's something that students really need as well. And different strategies for structuring writing, and practice with lots of variation in terms of style. Writing to sound like different genres can be really helpful to them, just so that they really kind of internalize that, and then also get flexible with tools that will support, rhetorical tools that will support their shifts from genre to genre. So that's what I have for today, and I once again apologize that I didn't get this episode out sooner, and I will continue working on this. I think I have ideas for 2 more about ROCSS. Writing is made of genres, and genres are made of ROCSS. So I think we'll see a part 3 and a part 4 in the coming weeks here, and that's what my plans are. So thanks again so much. I hope you are having a smooth ending as we get toward the end of the semester, and I hope things are going well for you. I appreciate you tuning in and listening, and I will be back again soon. Thank you so much. Have a good day.